Do you want?
All right. Thanks, Steve. My name is Patrick Bailey. I'm not anonymous, but I am an alcoholic, uh, among other things. Uh, when I say that I'm an alcoholic, uh, what I mean is that I get the phenomenon of craving once I start drinking, right? And no matter how hard I tried on my own resources, I never could stop drinking. After time and time again of trying to. I've been sober, clean and sober, disconnected from the drink and the physical, uh, spiritual malady. I'm still sick a little bit, but as far as like the obsession to drink, I've been disconnected from that uh, through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous for almost 6 years. Uh, and I was asked to speak on steps 6 and 7 today. So before I think I can accurately do that, I probably need to talk a little bit about steps 1 through 5 first. So uh, I started drinking when I was 9. Uh, I didn't really lose control until I was about the first time I tried to stop drinking. I was probably 16 or 17. I'd got a DUI, and I thought, well, I better stop this. Right, the first time I had some consequences. I didn't really want to stop, but so I guess that I may have been able to if I had the desire to. But of course, it tells me that in the AA text too. Uh, by the time I was 20, I got seriously into other substances as well as drinking, and it was a daily thing. I could not go without it. Uh, and I every time I would get another DUI or an AI or get in trouble with the law or have problems with my personal relationships as a result of my drinking or using, I would try to stop on my own. And by this time, I seriously wanted to stop, and I found that I couldn't. So the more that the book talks about like drinking meaning conviviality, release from care, boredom, and worry. And in those days, it wasn't that. And by that time, like people had started getting a little bit tired of the person I had become. And I did not understand my illness, and I got sent over and over into these rooms. Uh, I never did fully grasp because I never did really get around some people that had honestly worked these steps. Um, and like fast forward 20 years of I just thought I was consigned to that life, right? I thought I'm just going to have to manage, and I'm never. I was scared to death that if I honestly tried these steps, that if they failed, that there was just no hope whatsoever. So I didn't try them in a weird way, a perverse way of keeping some little bit of hope because this was the only thing I had never tried. And I got into some serious trouble. I was looking at like 15 years in penitentiary, and I asked to go to this treatment center, like long-term treatment. I didn't believe that I would get well. I just basically wanted to eat some cheeseburgers and chew some tobacco before I went and done that time. But when I got there, they their program like was a 12-step program. It wasn't AA. They used AA. They used recovery dynamics, and when I was there, I seen some guys that said they were recovered, and the more I was around those guys, uh, they they informed me a little bit about my condition. Like I didn't know why, and up to this point, I thought that I couldn't stop using because of I was having these thoughts that well, like I'm a failure. I'm weak-willed, and I thought it was a matter of willpower. Uh, but deep down inside, I knew that I was strong-willed, and I knew in almost every other aspect of my life that 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 I was stronger-willed than some of my friends that could control their drinking. And it wasn't until I got around some recovered alcoholics that I learned that the reason that I was powerless over alcohol was basically just because my mind and body were different than other people's. And it wasn't like it was always like that. And when I talk to people like working with others and stuff that really don't really understand the illness part of this, it's like I relate it to like a person that's is probably not born diabetic, but after a while of consuming these sweets and bad health decisions, like my body chemistry changed. And I think that's what happened with me with alcoholism. After a while of consuming alcohol, my body chemistry changed, and I developed this phenomenon of craving. The and this and this is only what I do. Like this, the book calls it a physical allergy, right? Which is a abnormal reaction to a substance. Uh, so with that being said, why can't I just not? If I'm allergic to poison ivy, I just don't go in poison ivy, right? But then Silkworth kind of explains it like, well, this sense of ease and comfort that comes with drinking is so elusive that after a while I can't differentiate the true from the false, right? I think my alcoholic life's the only normal one. And just to the extent of how I couldn't differentiate the true from the false was was the thing. It's like I didn't have any problem. It made a whole lot more sense to me, and it was a lot easier pill to swallow that to say that, oh well, I'm allergic to alcohol or drugs, I have this reaction, y'all don't. But to admit that I was insane, which is the other part, was kind of hard, right? Like this is why that and more about alcoholism, it says like most of us don't want to admit that we're bodily and mentally different from our fellows. And that's why our drinking careers have been characterized by vain attempts to control our drinking and using like other people, right? So I didn't have a problem admitting that I was, but like the more I was around these guys, and they related their experiences, like, oh well, I have this, right? Like, they made it a whole lot easier to admit, like, oh well, I'm insane, right? Like I was insane, and this restored me to sanity. If you don't believe me, let me tell you what I used to do. And I was like, started matching experiences with these guys and the consistencies in our drinking escapades, in our attempts at stopping, and that strange mental phenomenon that led to the first drink, the many firm resolutions based off my guilt, shame, and remorse, and then how that obsession always won out. Uh, so like it was that's so like I'm powerless. Basically, step one. The reason that I'm an alcoholic is like I have this, and I get a little bit in this big book, and it's like, and these guys are explaining this to me through their experiences, and I'm reading the experiences of some of the first of members of AA, and it's like in more about alcoholism, they expand on that, and I give many good examples of how, because like that was my thought, like, oh well, I'm allergic, like I just don't do it, right? Like I just, and then they hit me with Jim's story and Fred's story, who thought the same thing, right? Self-knowledge is going to fix this. So like then it eased me into step two in more about alcoholism with all these examples of like, if you think self-knowledge is going to fix it, because like when people talked about God and spiritual things, I thought that was beyond me. I thought it was everywhere but me. I'd try to go to church. I'd tried this, that, and other. I'd tried prayer. I didn't know why it really didn't work. And I kind of looked at that like a wishing, like Santa Claus or something like that, like a wish list. Like, hey, it's like, this is what I want. And when he didn't come through, it's like, well, wow, I had never thought about thy will be done, right? Uh, and I didn't understand these things. Like it's like not only did I come to realize that that there's a world back of ignorance and misunderstanding about this illness is like I was there too, and I was ignorant of and misunderstood exactly what was going on. But the more I hung around these guys and the more that I studied this text, the more I realized that, hey, I've got this, and it's telling me that I'm suffering from something that only a spiritual experience will conquer, right? I didn't have any problem with God. At one time I felt like I was at least agnostic. I was unsure, maybe even atheist. But I had some circumstances with a gunshot wound that that made me a believer, right? Like I had a main artery severed in two with a gunshot wound, and they saved me. First person at UK Hospital here in Kentucky that had survived, and they took a piece of artery here, and like either way, I was a believer, but like I didn't think that would get me, but so I was like, well, I don't know, man. A power greater than myself, like it can be anything. And basically, on step two, all I got to do is be willing to believe that there is a power greater than myself and take other simple steps, right? And this key phrase in there, like lack of power, that was my dilemma, obviously. But where and how do I find this power, right? It told me right there. Well, that's the main object of this book is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. So I thought, well, and these guys, that's what they said, right? It's like, hey, man, I just done what it said. I followed the directions, right? It's like I never was good at following directions, but like, and I thought, well, I got to be here anyway, right? I still didn't believe I would recover, but I thought, well, I got to be in this treatment center. Like, at least if I go along with what they're doing and work it and do what they asked me to do, and like I got to be here anyway. I can make my time easier here and probably eat some more cheeseburgers before I got to go do this time, right? And chew some more tobacco, maybe even find me a old girl or two. Uh, but so at that point, I thought, well, okay, I believed in God for a long time. That really ain't working for me. So I was like, well, these steps in this book is getting people sober, and it tells me, like I can relate to it thus far, is like that it's getting people sober, and I can't get myself sober. Therefore, these steps in this book is a power greater than myself. It's doing something that I can't seem to do. So like for step two, the steps, the book was my higher power, right? So I made a decision, and they was basically like some good recovered alcoholics, like broke it down for me. Like, hey man, here's the decision. Good decisions based off facts, right? Like, have you got down with the two pertinent ideas? The first two, like I'm an alcoholic, I got this body and mind thing, uh, and my life's unmanageable, right? Like, do I get down with the fact that no human power is going to relieve me of this? Well, that book ain't human power, right? Like I'm cool with that, right? I could get down with that. Well, then it's like God could and would if he were sought, right? So like, I don't know, but I got to be here for a while. So then they started talking about, okay, like let's go on to step three, right? So like the first requirement for that is to be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. I was like, man, can I go on? Because I'm not convinced, right? I am definitely not convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. I've been like, I've been doing all right, I think, and that's the shit I told myself, that I was doing all right. Uh, so but then they hit me with those things like, well, like you got a deeper problem, bro. Like selfishness and self-centeredness, that is the root of your problems, right? Like you play the actor and you're always trying to manage your own life, and you may at times seem whatever to get what you want. If you got to be mean and egotistical, you'll do that. If you got to be seem kind and virtuous to get what you want, and you try to control the people around you, right? And buddy, you step on people's toes and they retaliate, right? And so basically all your problems are of your own making. I was like, no, I'm pretty sure everybody else is I mean, I can get down with that a little bit, but I'm pretty sure that y'all are to blame too, right? Like y'all are a lot of the source of the problem, right? And I told myself that time and time again, like, well, if my old lady wasn't doing this, right? Like, or if my parents didn't do this, or if my kids didn't act this way, like if that judge hadn't have done this, if those creditors wouldn't get on me, like if that boss wouldn't fire me, like right, everybody was the problem except me. And then they said like selfishness, like in self-centeredness is the root of your problems, bro. Like, and it comes in many forms, like 100 forms of self-delusion, probably more, and 100 forms of self-pity, probably more, 100 forms of fear, probably more, and 100 forms of self-seeking, right? So like, well, I don't know about this, but it's like, so step three, It's like, and then they get me down there and says like, well, a lot of us had moral and the only way to overcome this selfishness is with God's help. Like that's the only way I can do this, right? I wasn't convinced, but I was made up my mind. I'm going to do what they say I'm going to do, like what they tell me to do. And they said, like, you cannot reduce your self-centeredness much by trying on your own power. And I was like, well, okay. I didn't understand that at all. Like, I just kind of glazed over that. And but I had some good guys that understood this stuff. And when they broke down step 3 for me, says like, man, here's the decision you're making, bro. If you're really going to do this, like, uh, you're going he's going to be the father. What does a father do, right? Like he's going to be the director. You're not going to direct your life and everybody in it no more. And like, what's a director do? He kind of tells you what to do, right? And another cool thing about a director is like, I bet all y'all know your favorite movie, right? It's like, do you know who the director is? No, you don't ever show his face, right? I don't know who directed Pulp Fiction, right? Well, yeah, I do, Quentin Tarantino. But anyway, like, so like, he's behind the scenes, right? You really don't see his face much, but it's like he runs the show. He's going to be the principal, and he's the agent. I didn't know what that means. What is a principal? Like, is that the guy that like give me detention in high school? No, this is like an agent, a principal, and an agent, and all these are relationships, right? Like a principal, an agent is somebody that stands in and 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 represents the principal, right? And does not take advantage of that relationship, does not take credit for anything that the principal does. Like he stands in for you and as a representative of you. So it's like, okay, this is kind of what this decision is. And he's the father and I'm the child, right? It's like, so what's a father do? A lot of things, right? Like he provides. He cares for me, takes care of me. He protects. He's a role model. He's there for me. Like, and if you had a bad experience with your father, like a lot of people take that, it's like, well, I don't know about that father, but I'm talking about the ideal father, right? Like somebody that's going to be there for me, somebody that's going to be a mentor, somebody that's going to show me the way, somebody that's going to discipline me, right? And not just let me do whatever I want. Uh, so I kind of understood what that was talking about, but I was like, well, it was so much easier to say, well, I'm just going to do what the book says, right? So like, just make the decision. But a good decision is based off facts. And the facts are here was pretty simple. It was on page 25. It says, if you're seriously alcoholic as we are, there's no middle of the road solution. Like I can go on to the bitter end and go through this vicious cycle of putting the first one in me, going on a well-known spree, making it emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again, emerging restless, irritable, and discontent until the obsession and that thought of the ease and comfort overrides the rational, truthful thought that says this is what happens every time you put the first one in your guy. I can either do that and I can consciously go on to the bitter end, jails, institution, or death, blotting out my intolerable situation with the ease and comfort the best I can, or the other alternative was to uh, accept spiritual help. And this idea, because I honestly wanted to, and we're willing to make the effort. Right at this point, I honestly wanted to, and I was willing to make the effort, but I still didn't believe it would work. Right, but I had to simplify it even further. Like, hey, misery, death, life, and a possibility of happiness. And the truth is, like, some of these guys share my experience, right? And they seem happy. They seem to not be obsessed and wanting to leave this place every day to go get high or to go whatever, run do whatever. And they seem really kind, right? Like, and they're patient with me, they're understanding with me, and that was big for me. So I basically made this decision, and it was like this third step prayer is like, well, hey, uh, basically what this meant to me in a nutshell was, God, you help me and I'll help some other people, right? You relieve me of this bondage of selfishness that and take away this difficulty and these difficulties and I'll go help somebody else. I'll show people the way, right? I'll be your agent. I'll be, I'll let you run the show and work through me, right? Uh, I really didn't fully get down with that, but I decided to go on, right? And then they said, like, well, okay, if you're, if you're, how do you do that decision, right? You need to launch out on a course of vigorous action because your alcohol is only a symptom of the illness, right? So if you really want to do this, you got to get down to causes and conditions, right? There's a cause for the condition, right? So basically, what I did was take an inventory. They said, man, self will was my problem, and they said it manifests itself through these ways. So basically, I'm taking an inventory to make good on my decision of my self will, how I run my life on self will, and they told me that I will see that I'm the cause of the problem. I didn't really believe that, but I said I'm going to do this. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to carefully follow these directions, and if it don't work, it don't work, right? So I inventoried resentments, right? Like, and listed my why, people, principles, institutions, like why I was angry, what was threatened, what different instincts were threatened, right? And and then where was I selfish, dishonest, or frightened and self-seeking, right? And what I saw about halfway through that inventory was what they were saying. Every problem that I had, every resentment that I had that I was blaming everybody else for, I had made a decision based off my own self-interest. I'd stepped on people's toes and they retaliated. Now I'm angry at you. And I started to comprehend what they were talking about like, how I'd squandered the hours that may have been worthwhile, and that the people of this world dominated me. Like, I was pissed off at a lot of people, and it wasn't hurting them at all, but it was renting space in my head all the time, right? And I was full of hate and bitterness and contempt for everybody. And so I inventoried my fears. They said, like, hey, and I bracketed fear everywhere it cropped up in my resentment inventory. Like, and they said that self-reliance is the problem, right? So like, my sponsor line does it a little bit different. It's like, hey, it's a 4-column fear inventory, right? Hey, like, how does it affect my pride? What's the fear? Why do I have it? And how does it affect my pride? What would God have me to be? Because now I'm on a different basis, right? Just to the extent that I do as God would have me, was, will He enable me to match calamity with serenity? So how does it affect my pride? How's it? What would God have me to be? How does it affect my self-esteem? What would God have me to be with that self-esteem? Personal relations, pocketbook, ambitions, all the way down the line. And I started to see it, man. You're really afraid, bro. And I got a clear-cut direction. I was like, this is what God wants me to be over here. And I feel like at this point that this shit may work, right? So I went ahead and done a sex inventory. Like they say, we need to overhaul them, right? If I'm overhauling a car, like, I take each piece out, right? Each piece apart, and I look at it and say, is that a good piece? Is it the cause of my problem in my car? Is it going to cause me some problems? And I analyze my past relationships and look at it and say, like, and some pieces were like, oh man, this is no good, right? Like, I need a new part. And some of them was like, oh, well, I just need to brush this up, right? Clean it up a little bit, right? And put it back in there. So like, that's what I've done. I analyzed my whole past, took that stuff to God, and what would I have done differently, right? What should have I done differently? This is where I get my sane and sound sex ideal, right? And then I get real clear on what I think God wants me to be in a relationship. And what I found basically was I was never a partner in a relationship, right? It was always about me. Like, every single one of them, every one of them were selfish, and a lot of people got harmed. So after this, like, it talks about, it's like, hey, it's like, if you've really done a thorough inventory up to this point, you've written down a lot, right? And you started to comprehend the futility and fatality of resentments, right? And I did. I started to understand that. And basically what I seen was like, I'm sick. I'm sick, I'm selfish, I'm dishonest, I'm prideful, I'm envious, I'm all these things, and all that's because I'm afraid. I'm afraid I ain't gonna get what I want, or I'm afraid I'm gonna lose what I got, right? And I started to see when I understood these things in myself, I started to see that the same thing I'm pissed off at people about when I get pissed off is the same things that's in me, and they're just afraid. They're afraid they ain't gonna get what they want. You know, when somebody's really prideful, or somebody's really sarcastic, or somebody's short, or somebody's angry, that's all coming from the same place it was coming from me. And I started to learn patience and tolerance, and even towards my enemies, right? I started to understand myself, and I started to understand other people, right? But then they said, like, hey, bro, like, this ain't enough. Like, you wrote down a lot, you swallowed some big chunks of truth for yourself, and hopefully you've started to see that God can, like, remove from you what you've seen that's of no value to you, that you've been placing so much value on when you took this inventory, right? Like, hopefully you can see that. That's the object of an inventory, right? If I take an inventory in a store and I go down through there and I'm ordering a bunch of Pall Malls because I really like Pall Malls, but they ain't selling, like, it's ruining my business, right? Like, I'm gonna go broke in this business if I order shit that I think's working for me that's not working for me. So, like, so that's what I do. Is like, but they said you need to share this with somebody else. Share your inventory, like, and somebody that understands what's going on, right, in step 5, and really understands what we're trying to do here, right? We're on a spiritual journey. We've taken an inventory, and somebody that can help me see things that I cannot see. Because let me tell you, I said self-delusion, 100 forms of self-delusion, but what I've come to find out is self-delusion is the key thing. Silkworth nailed it when he said I couldn't differentiate the true from the false, because, like, I can unconsciously rationalize my will into anything, right? Anything. And sometimes I just can't see it. Sometimes people on the outside that understand this need to point out the things. And a good example of this was my sponsors. Like, before I even chose him as my sponsor and got serious about this stuff, is like, he just passed me the 12 and 12 one time, and he said, like, here, read this, man. He's like, and I read it, and it was like, it was that when it's talking about self-righteous anger in the 12 and 12, and it says, like, some of us have self-righteous anger, right? Like, we take a perverse pleasure in the fact that other people annoy us, right? It gives us this false feeling of superiority and security, right? And when I read that, I thought, well, who's this motherfucker think he is? Right? I was full of dissonance, right? I was like, what the hell? Like, he just, that's a stab at me. And then I kind of just reflected for a minute, and I thought, man, that's what I need, because I could not see that in myself. I could not see that in myself, but my life was full of it. Hell, I'd draw disability based on that. I told the disability judge that every time I was at a job after that gunshot incident, that I wanted to strangle somebody, and I meant it. I didn't say that to get disability. And he said, well, Mr. Bailey, I cannot put you back to work now, right? Like, you done told me you want to strangle somebody. So, like, he gave me disability, and I didn't see it in myself. I didn't see that I judge other people because it makes me feel superior, right? If I can point out what you ain't doing right, if I can make you wrong, that makes me right. And man, I like to be right, right? It makes me feel superior. But I seen the value of discussing what's going on with me, with myself, right? With somebody who understands that we're on a spiritual journey and that we truly are, which kind of leads me into step 6, right? Like, what is it? It says it's just a paragraph in the big book, and emphasize willingness, right? Like, that as being indispensable, right? If we can answer to our satisfaction. And my experience with just so we're clear, my experience, what led me in, is what I'm answering to my satisfaction is, after this meditation, after this 5th step, it's like, I'm building this arch they talk about, right? I'm gonna walk a free man. It's like, am I skimping on the cement? Are the stones properly in place? So I reviewed the first 5 proposals and made sure my work's solid so far, right? Before I build this arch and it falls. So I look at step 1. Yeah, I'm solid there, right? Like, I understand why I'm an alcoholic. I'm pretty sure that it's like, I'm on this path that I believe. I'm taking other simple steps. Like, I'm coming to believe that God may restore me to sanity here, right? I've made a decision. Oh, no, that stone's not right, right? It's like I turned my will and life over to this book. I hadn't sincerely took a position that I'm going to be a worker for God, right? That I'm going to be his agent. He's the principal behind the scenes, right? I haven't really fully grasped that he's going to protect me and guide for me and give me guidance and be my role model that I strive to be like, right? I hadn't sincerely taken that position, right? So like I said, like I had taken thorough inventory, but I fixed that stone, right? And I did that. So when I got to step 6, like I has, like, okay, I answered those questions for I answered each to our satisfaction. And I looked at step 6, like, what is this? Like, some people pointed me to the 12 and 12. It's like, is this basically, this is like where I'm at. Am I going to, this is the step that separates the men from the boys, right? Like, am I going to continue? And I hate to say that because there's a lot of women in AA, and I hate that it says that, right? Like, I basically like, does it separate? This is a step that separates the spiritually immature from the spiritually mature, right? What do I want to be? And I always wanted to be a grown ass man. And I would have told you I was. I told many people. I told my parents every time they told me I needed to do something to take care of my responsibilities. I'm a grown ass man. I know what I'm doing, right? But I knew deep down that this was a reputation I really didn't deserve, right? So like, what do I do here? Like, and I have these flaws in my character. I had some of them that I was still placing a lot of value on, right? And I really wasn't sure that God could take them from me. But I thought here's really where it comes back to that that statement in the third step that says like I cannot reduce my self-centeredness by trying much on my power, no matter what my convictions are, philosophical or moral. I cannot fix self-will with self-will. I can't fix dishonest thinking with dishonest thinking. I can't fix prideful thinking with prideful thinking. The same mind that is the problem cannot fix the problem. This is where I need God's help, right? Am I willing to let these things go and just step out on shore of faith here and see? Because, like, I'll just be honest with you, dishonesty served me a lot, seemed like. Selfishness served me, right? I was placing way. So, like, who am I going to be if I let these things go, right? So I made the decision, right? And it tells me it's like if I've got some things that I'm not really willing to let go of, like I pray for the willingness, right? I pray for the willingness to let go of these things. And step 7 is like this is it. Like if I can do that, it's like when I'm ready, you know, we say to ourselves, my creator, I'm now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character that stands in the way of my usefulness to you and to my fellows. Oh, there's that third step again, right? It's like that's the decision I made. This ain't about me and put my life back together. God has started to relieve me of these difficulties that I've had at this point, right? Am I gonna show people? Am I gonna be this guy? Am I gonna work for it, whatever that is? And I don't know what it is. I know it's something. I know it ain't me. I know it resides in me, which was a big help too, because I thought it was everywhere but me. But when they said it was in me and in everybody else, I thought, well, no wonder he knows everything's going on. He's in everybody. So, so to me, I really didn't see the results of step 6 and 7 until I started making amends. When I took that list and I started making amends and going back to people, like this is where I started to see that I'm an honest person. I can be honest. Like with God's help, when I'm trying to properly use my will, I can be honest. I can be to a certain extent less selfish. You know, I can be more humble than I am prideful and worried about what everybody thinks and trying to rise to the top of the heap of the social instinct, right? Like the social constructs of life. Like I started to see that like I can be tactful, I can be sensible, I can think about others more than I think about myself. And this is where I started to see the results of 6 and 7 was in 8 and 9, right? And and basically when I get to this point, it's one of those deals to where like step 7 really starts taking sometimes my pride. It's crazy how God like uses my character flaws sometimes as a good thing, right? There's certain times that my pride comes in and I do things that make that is God's will, that I know is God's will, just because my pride kicks in and says, man, I ain't gonna let these other people outdo me, right? There's certain times that that my dishonesty is used. Like I don't want to tell somebody the cold hard truth sometimes. Sometimes it's more virtuous and godlike, my creator like, to omit certain things, right? Which is dishonest, right? So it started to, the more I start to do step 10 and make amends, and 11 and especially 12, I start to see this like, hey, God is doing for me what I can't do for myself, right? If I'll just keep these blocks removed, uh, my that these character flaws cause me from that disconnect me from other people and God, like he will restore me to sane thinking. And not only do I start to develop some being able to differentiate the true from the false a little bit, I start to just to really be able to discern that God's will ain't just black and white, just light and love and stuff. Sometimes sometimes you got to be. Sometimes the darkness is there and that was the main thing for me, man, with this program is like when I was using in my whole life, like I had these two aspects of myself. There was a dark side and there was a light side, right? And when I was around people that wasn't using, that were seemed to be good people, right? Like I wanted to hide that dark side, right? And pretend it wasn't there. I was always the actor. And when I was around people that in the madness that I was using with, there were times I wanted to be a good person, but I couldn't show that side to them. And I always had this split within me, right? And this program has helped me embrace and accept everything about myself. I'm not just love and light. I've got a dark side and I've got a light side. And each of those things could be properly used to help other people, right? Not just for my own selfish gain, but to help people. And the main thing is now that there ain't a split within me, I'm whole. I'm sane. Like I'm a whole person today. I'm a nerd. I can be gangster. I like to have a good time, right? But also at the same time, like I can be a good person. Things that I guess people seen in me a long time, and when I can just be real and authentic and don't have to be this or that, because God made me this way, and if it's in me, it's for good reason. If I properly use my will, like this is where step 6 and 7 came in, and I tell you, like there is no confusion to me about this program. I know what manifestations of self will are. I know what God's will brings me. It brings me a new freedom, a new happiness, serenity, joy, peace. And when I'm frustrated, a little bit fearful, anything but at total ease, there is something within me that is self will manifesting itself either in my thoughts or my actions. So it directs me to watch for these things, right? Like there's no, and this is blocking me off from this decision. And if I don't stay in fit spiritual condition, like it's just a matter of time before the delusions come in. I start to think like the drink's okay. It's the solution to some problems. That God ain't the solution. That He can't take these things from me, right? But I've got to do it all. I've got to know that I need outside perspective when I can't see it. I got to continue to take inventory, and I got to continue to do step 6 and 7 and my step 10. Right? That's what I'm doing. Step 6 and 7 is basically step 10 for me today. Right? Like I watch for these things. Step 4. I discuss when they crop up. I ask God to remove them at once. That's step 6 and 7. I discuss with somebody immediately. That's step 5. I make amends quickly if I've harmed somebody. That's steps 8 and 9. Right? And if I do this, I continue to grow in understanding and effectiveness of the world of the spirit. And I live up to my third step decision. Right? And as a result of this, I can have good personal relationships. I've held the same job for over almost 4 years, which is something I never could do. Right? Like I can be a father to my kids today. I can be a son. I've restored relationships with my dad. My mom passed before I got sober, but I can be a son to my father. I can restore our relationship and spend quality time with him and be there for him. I can be a brother to my sister. Like I can be a productive member of society, all because of this program taught me how to use my will, right? To properly use my will. And the bottom line is like, who likes problems, right? Like, why would I continue to do self will? Who in the hell likes problems? Like, once you see the truth of the matter, it's like, why in the hell would I do that? Who would do that? And I offer a key to anybody that wants some freedom, right? Anybody wants some freedom, especially for us like alcoholics and drug addicts. These steps transform my life and transform every aspect of my life, starting at my spirit, working on my mind and the inventory, and it manifests itself to a pretty heavenly existence, right? But this ain't just about like helping other alcoholics to me. Like I get to help other people identify some of these things in themselves. Like I feel used to every single person because like we're the extreme example of self-will run right. But what I've learned is the whole world's spiritually sick, almost all of it. And I can help people right today. That's a pretty powerful thing. So I hope I've give a good representation of what these steps in 6 and 7 have done for me. So I don't even know what time it is, but thank you guys for listening.